The morning began like any other. Quiet, slow, with the faint smell of rain drifting through the open window. I made my tea the same way I had for years, stirring sugar into the chipped white mug my late husband once favored. But that morning, even before my son arrived, something in the air felt heavier, as if the house itself knew what was coming. My son Daniel had never been an early visitor, yet there he was at 8 a.m. standing at the doorstep with a forced smile and his wife clinging to his arm. "Mom," he said softly, "we've been thinking maybe it's time you move somewhere smaller. Something easier to manage." The words slid off his tongue with the calm of someone who'd rehearsed them 100 times. His wife nodded beside him, her eyes scanning the living room like a buyer, not a guest. Every detail she noticed, the curtains, the furniture, the walls my husband built with his own hands, felt like a silent theft. I said nothing. I simply watched, the tea cooling between my palms. They didn't come to help. They came to take. When Daniel spoke again, his tone had hardened. "You could sell this place. Use the money for a retirement home. We'd take care of the paperwork." That's when I saw it, the flicker of impatience behind his practiced concern, the greed he tried to hide behind a smile. It wasn't about my comfort. It was about the deed, the property, and the land. Outside, thunder rolled softly. Inside, something inside me snapped into place, quiet, cold, and sharp. I looked at my son and said only, "You forget, Daniel. This house remembers everything." He laughed, brushing off the words, but I meant every one of them. That morning I decided I wouldn't just protect my home, I would teach him what greed costs. And when I did, he'd never forget it. For days after that conversation, Daniel and his wife acted as though nothing had happened. They visited often, too often, bringing groceries, fake smiles, and shallow laughter that echoed through my quiet home like the clatter of hollow coins. I watched them closely, every move, every whisper. They thought they were clever, but greed makes people careless. One afternoon, as I watered the lilies in the back garden, I heard their voices through the kitchen window. They were inside. I hadn't even heard them come in. "She's getting weaker," his wife said. "If we push a little more, she'll give up the house willingly." Daniel's voice followed, low and impatient. "The lawyer said once she transfers the property, it's ours for good. She trusts me, she always has." The words settled in the air like smoke. My hands trembled, but not from fear. The lilies bent under the stream of water as I stood still listening. Every word was a nail sealing their fate. That evening I went through my husband's old study, the one no one had ever entered since he passed. Dust lay thick on the bookshelves, but his safe still sat behind the portrait on the wall. Inside, I found what I was looking for, the original property documents, and a voice recorder he used for his work. I sat at the old desk, the light dim and golden, and pressed record. "November 12th, I whispered. "Daniel and his wife plan to take my house, but I will not let them. I will leave proof for whoever comes after me. This is not revenge, this is justice." The next day I invited them for dinner. I cooked Daniel's favorite meal, just like I used to when he was little. His wife complimented the food, pretending warmth she didn't feel. But when she excused herself to make a phone call, I noticed her bag left slightly open, and inside the corner of a document transfer form. My name was already filled in, her handwriting neat and careful. I smiled. The storm outside began to rise again, thunder rolling like distant drums. They thought I was blind to their plan, but they had just stepped into mine. The night they left, I sat in the quiet living room and listened to the wind moving through the old wooden beams. The rain had stopped, but the storm had not. It was only waiting, just like me. I knew my son better than he knew himself. Daniel was impatient. Greed makes people rush. He wouldn't wait for long before trying something bold. So, I began preparing, not with anger, but with precision. First, I called my late husband's lawyer, an old friend who owed me more than one favor. I asked him to draft a temporary property agreement, transferring the house to a family trust under my control. It would look like the transfer Daniel wanted, but with one clause buried deep inside. If the transfer was done under coercion, it would void itself instantly. When the papers were ready, I left them in the drawer near the dining table, right where I knew Daniel's curious eyes would find them. Then I started setting the stage. The following morning, I accidentally mentioned feeling dizzy. I left the back door unlocked. I made small, deliberate mistakes, tiny signals to convince them I was slipping, that I was no longer paying attention. Every move I made was bait wrapped in weakness. 2 days later, they took it. Daniel came by with his wife, acting gentle and sympathetic. "Mom," he said softly, "you really should think about that form we talked about. We could take care of things for you. You deserve to rest." I smiled, my hands trembling just enough to sell the illusion. "Maybe you're right," I whispered. "Maybe it's time." He looked relieved, too relieved. I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of victory. That was all I needed. When they left the next morning, I followed them quietly to their car and slipped a small recording device, the same one from my husband's study, under the driver's seat. I didn't need to confront them. I only needed to listen. That night, when I played it back, I heard everything. Daniel's voice, sharp and greedy. "She's signing it soon. Once she does, we'll move in and sell it, and that's it, finally free." His wife laughed softly. "She won't even know what happened." I paused the recording. My reflection stared back from the darkened window, calm, cold, determined. They thought I was the old woman they could outsmart, but I had already written the ending, and it wouldn't be theirs. They came the morning I arranged for the appraiser. The same day I quietly signed papers that would not read the way they thought. Daniel walked in with swagger, convinced success was within reach. Jennifer followed, bright and thinly armored in civility. They expected a quick conversation, a soft nudge, and signatures done and dusted. They expected the old warhorse to fold. I met them at the threshold with a smile like a closed fist. The house smelled of baked bread and oil. The table was set as if for a celebration. They sat, uneasy at first, trying to place the rhythm of the day. Small talk scraped the corners of the room. They glanced at the papers I'd left in the drawer, the ones they'd been eager to find. Their eyes lingered on the pen like children waiting for permission. I poured tea. My hands were steady. Inside, the lawyer had set everything in motion. One transfer placed in trust, irrevocable in appearance, but written with a precise fail-safe that would swallow any theft attempted by force or fraud. The clause was simple to a judge and poisonous to a thief. When Daniel reached for the pen, his smile was practiced, his voice smooth. "We can get the paperwork started now, Mom. It's faster if we just sign today." I folded my hands and set my voice to something softer, almost kind. "Do you remember when you were small and broke your neighbor's window?" I asked. He blinked, the question disorienting him. "You were so afraid you'd get in trouble, but you stood up, offered to fix it, and you learned what responsibility felt like. Do you remember that?" He swallowed. "I remember." The room tightened. I slid the folder across the table so the page with the clause faced them, exposed like a wound. "Sign here," I said. "I want you to read it first." Greed always rushes. It hates reading. It wants the prize before the cost. Daniel's eyes skimmed, then locked on a line that didn't belong to the usual legal script. He frowned, confusion cracking the veneer. Jennifer's fingers trembled as she read, the color drained from her face in stages. This isn't what we discussed," she said, her voice too high and brittle. I watched them gather panic like a second language. "You plan to take advantage of me," I said quietly, the accusation a small blade. "You plan to make me a curiosity, an accident. You forgot one thing. This house remembers what was promised, and the law will keep me safe when I prove the promise was broken." Daniel's mouth opened and closed. He tried to argue, to charm, to bargain. Lawyers' words, threats of contests, and whispered hints of delay tumbled from him. I let them fall. I had proofs, the recorder, the photos, the messages. I had the will restructured, witnesses lined up, and a trust that transformed their greed into nothing. When he lunged for the folder, it was too late. The trap wasn't violence, it was visibility. I had shown the world what they were, conspirators hiding behind affection. When the phone on my table rang, I answered with calm. "Yes," I said to the voice on the other end. "Bring them in." The rest of the day closed like a book on a table, hard, final, and impossible to pry open. They didn't speak on the way to the lawyer's office. Daniel drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, jaw clenched tight. Jennifer sat beside him, small and pale, glancing at her phone but not seeing anything. The air between them was thick, heavy with the realization that their plan had collapsed, and I had been the one holding the strings all along. I followed in my car, quiet and steady. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out days ago. What remained was something colder, the kind of calm that comes only after a storm has torn through everything and left the truth in its wake. When we arrived, my lawyer was already waiting, his files neatly stacked, a faint smile hidden behind his professionalism. He knew exactly what this meeting meant. Inside the small office, Daniel tried to speak first. "She's confused," he began, his voice cracking just enough to betray the fear beneath it. She doesn't know what she's signing. My wife and I were just trying to help. Enough, I said quietly. The word cut through him like a blade. I turned to the lawyer. You can play the recording now. He pressed a button, and Daniel's own voice filled the room, clear, greedy, unguarded. She's signing it soon. Once she does, we'll move in, sell it, and that's it, finally free. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jennifer covered her face. Daniel couldn't look at me. For a long time, no one spoke. Then I said softly, free from what, Daniel? From the woman who raised you? From the roof that kept you safe? From the hands that built the very floor you're standing on? He started to speak, but I raised a hand. Don't, I said. You made your choice. The lawyer turned the final page of the trust documents and slid them toward me. I signed, steady and deliberate. My house was no longer a possession to be stolen. It was untouchable, legally sealed, eternally mine. As they left the office, Daniel paused at the door. For the first time he looked small, not the man who had plotted against his mother, but the frightened boy who had once needed her comfort. He whispered, Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, You never mean it until it's too late. He left without another word. The door closed behind him, the sound final, clean, and echoing like the last note of a long-forgotten song. I stood there for a moment, feeling the weight lift from my chest. Then I smiled, not out of victory, but of peace. Greed had tried to take my home, but in the end, it only lost its own. The house is quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache. It breathes. The walls don't listen for lies anymore. The air feels lighter, as if it too was waiting for the truth to settle. I walked through each room slowly, touching the things that once felt ordinary. The table where Daniel used to do his homework, the stairs he once slid down laughing, the window where I watched him wave on his first day of school, all those memories layered like old paint, still there, still mine. For weeks I asked myself why he did it. Maybe it was greed, maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the simple cruelty of forgetting what love costs to create, and how easily people destroy what they never had to build. But I learned something in the wreckage of it all. You can lose your home and still find your strength. You can be betrayed and still remain whole. And sometimes protecting what's yours isn't about fighting. It's about reminding. The day after the lawyers finalized everything, I placed the recorder back in my husband's study where it belonged. Then I opened the windows, let the air roll in, and for the first time in a long while I laughed. A small, quiet laugh that filled the empty corners of the house. Because the truth is simple. I didn't teach my son what greed costs by punishing him. I taught him by surviving it. And as the evening light fell across the living room, golden, soft, forgiving, I whispered into the silence, This house remembers, Daniel. It always will.